And there is this element, especially when it comes to the health sector, because it's perhaps the most intimate part of information, personal information that people have, that AI can in fact improve privacy. But I think because of these misconceptions that exist within society, there is a lack of a bridge of knowledge between the realities of the technology that can be completely automated so as to ensure that no human or no other human goes through your data. But people, on a general basis of studies, number of different studies have shown that have a lack of trust towards it nonetheless. How do you think we should bridge that gap? Is it just through time? Will we adapt to it, or should we have very broader discussions at different levels?
I think that broader discussions are fundamental. So not only, for example, I would say that we should include in the school curriculum, like already from early ages, and try to explain it maybe to kids in a very, very simple language. I would say that, yeah, maybe not like very young kids, but maybe like, for example, like late primary education, for example, that could be something, and even to reinforce it through secondary education. And also, I'm thinking like, for example, I remember like some years ago, and I remember that the Swedish government sent like it was something I call like what to do in case of crisis, for example, and it was to everyone. And I thought like, oh, maybe they could do the same with AI too, for example, like to have like simpler explanations and to make sure that everyone reads it, for example. That could be something that is done, and even like that maybe politicians try to make that more like as a matter of concern, right? And also then maybe also like so not only like in that sense to all citizens, but also, for example, when in the case of public sector AI systems, that we inform the citizens whenever an AI system is causing something to them, is like using, for example, their data, especially when it's like what they'll call like high stakes decisions, so decisions that could have a big impact on someone's life. I think they should be able to tell citizens that they are using those systems so that citizens could themselves get informed about what are the risks with these systems, for example, and what would be the difference that a human decides over me versus an AI, because there could be differences also. So I think that giving information to citizens should be like, for me, it's like almost like a fundamental right. Like they should be informed.
But don't you think that's because fundamentally government is known to be, especially democratic governments, have a small, slow process. So they take their time for going through the different arguments. And these systems are very disruptive. They come at a very high and fast pace. And I think there is this sense of erosion that exists right now, that these systems are taking over many different sectors, and many governments have had different types of failures depending on the government in adapting to them, and at the same time, as you mentioned, informing their citizens about their impacts. Now, of course, I think the European Union has relatively been better and front-footed in taking care of this, but generally, do you have any concerns about this fast pace of innovation?
A little bit, yeah. I think it. Yeah, as I mentioned before, I think that it should be really aligned with what we value as society, because I think that if that's not the case, and there could be like the potential that the systems start behaving in ways that we don't expect, for example, or ways that could harm people, it could cause distrust. And then I don't think it's a good idea that society in large distrust AI systems, because it would be basically like, it would be a shame, because it would make it that people would not use them. And there would be even like ways for them to maybe try to, I was thinking now, I don't know what's the term, but I remember that there's, for example, some people that tried not to be scanned by facial recognition systems by using, for example, different glasses, or, for example, using a mask, for example. I remember that they used that, for example, back in the Hong Kong demonstrations, for example. So I could imagine that could be, for example, like a bit like dystopian future, right? That if people don't trust the systems, they could start getting in the ways that, like to fight against them. So I would rather that this doesn't happen, right? So I would say that we should this part of transparency and education. I would say it would be very important for that to avoid that happening.